this next section, we look at some of the influences on scientific research, and particularly that there's, in terms of the way society operates, there's three main ones: economic, social, and political. And we'll spend a bit of time looking at each of these. Now, one of the biggest things that often is criticised is this idea of space exploration. Why are we spending billions of dollars to explore space or to send things into space when a lot of people will say, well, we've got so many problems at home? And you might argue that's not a bad argument. However, when you look at space exploration in context, this is some data from 2015 where NASA had $18 billion to spend. The military had close to $600 billion to spend. So it's possible to argue that it's not really space is not the problem, it's other things, like why are we spending so much money on military budgets? And again, there's arguments. Well, the world can be a dangerous place, and again, it's not a simple cut and dried argument. And so particularly when you look here, and this is just a little infographic that looks at some things that have come from space travel, space exploration. Your camera phone. Camera phones are, only a relatively recent innovation, but that came about from space exploration and working on space exploration. Scratch-resistant lenses, which are pretty common in most people's glasses if they need them. CAT scans, again, LEDs, landmine removal, which is particularly important in some countries. Your common sneakers, foil blankets, water purification systems, probably one of the more important ones there, came about so that astronauts could recycle their water. Things like a dustbuster, like small handheld vacuum cleaners. You go there, ear thermometers, home insulation, the jaws of life, wireless headsets, memory foam, freeze-dry food. These are all innovations that have been particularly important in different parts of the world at different times. They've all come about because of research into space exploration. Also, again, nuclear power generation. And again, as we've said a few times, it's not a cut and dried thing. Now, again, this is a little bit of an infographic that's showing, there's a lot of deaths that come each year from pollution. And, coal is one of the biggest producers of that there. Greenhouse gas emissions, mainly from coal, oil, natural gas, biomass, which is just things like burning wood in fires. Hydropower causes some deaths, it has some greenhouse emissions. Now, the interesting thing there is nuclear doesn't have a lot, but wind and solar have hardly any. And so again, it's about making judgments. Coal at the moment is probably still an important resource in terms of baseload energy, but the cost per kilowatt hour is increasing, and the cost per kilowatt hour for wind and solar is going down as well. And of course, main sort of elephant in the room here is this idea of nuclear waste. Parts of Russia, China, the United States, particularly the United States, and I think that's Europe, that's France, England, and Germany there. They have huge amounts of nuclear waste, and there's no way of actually safely getting rid of that at the moment. Again, use of antimicrobial drugs, so vaccinations. And so, there's a lot of, again, misinformation and that out there. And, there's a huge number of diseases that have vaccines. And so things like whooping cough, which isn't around much anymore, hepatitis, tetanus, human papillomavirus, which is a sexually transmitted viral infection that can cause a lot of cervical cancer. These are all things that are preventable, and lives have been saved because of them. But of course, there are plenty of adults that still need some of these vaccinations. And the vaccine hesitancy trend is something that's disturbing, because we are talking about something that is completely preventable. Another thing that often gets discussed quite passionately is genetically modified foods. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that pretty much every bit of food that you buy at a supermarket has been genetically modified. We've discussed that a few times before. There's only a limited amount of crops in the world that generate most of our food. Same thing with the animals and that there as well. So the difference is that genetic modification did happen over generations. But now in the world of CRISPR, we can do that very, very quickly. And so one of the things you can do is that genetically modified, you can increase the amount of nutrients. You can get rid of allergens out of some of them. They can be designed to grow in dry areas. They can be designed to not be attacked by pests, which means it's using yet less pesticide. They don't go off as much. But there are new things there. Even though you might be getting rid of one allergen, maybe you're creating another. Maybe you're creating super weeds, things that will just keep on going. Maybe we'll get to a point where because the genetic modification is happening so much that these things can't actually produce naturally in the wild. We don't know. And so that's part of the arguments that occur. And there's a bit of truth in both sides. There is hopefully some sort of middle ground. Another one there, again, going back to energy production and petroleum products. And, again, a lot of debate going on here, but the fact is that petroleum products, there's really no evidence that they aren't causing some form of global warming. And so you've got a lot of data coming from places like NASA. In Australia, the Bureau of Meteorology produces a lot of things there. And then you've got petroleum companies that are sort of muddying the waters. And, climate change has been something that's been known for a while. It is happening. The data all is there. However, what happens is that the companies using similar tactics that tobacco companies used, saying, well, oh yeah, the climate's changing, but maybe it isn't this. And it's this idea of causing confusion that a lot of people, when they listen to it, get confused as well. And this idea of, there's uncertainties, it's impossible for scientists to actually definitively do that. And so in some cases here, what they're actually doing is using the arguments of science and the idea that science says, well, we're not 100% right, but this is what we think is happening. And they're using that language to try and confuse people. And of course, what we have now is in a lot of places, and particularly in the US and look all across the world, the fire seasons that normally would happen in a month or two in summer have expanded. The amount of high energy storms has increased as well. And so often what you'll get there is one area will have drought and the other area will just have floods and things like that going on. And so it's not so much the warming, but the warming is causing huge storms. So in the US there, down the bottom right, you've got Florida, and all those countries around that Gulf there suffer huge storms. And those storms are getting bigger and more intense. Finally, one of the last things that can influence people's minds is this idea of drones and robotics. And there's a huge range of stuff on here. And in this little section here, we'll just focus on the drones. But robotics, you can be talking about things. There's a lot of prosthetic limbs that are becoming robotic. Robots do a lot of large manufacturing work. In mining companies, robots do things like drive trucks around. And the idea of artificial intelligence is becoming a really interesting field of study, but also where is it going to take us? And so in this case here, this little graphic here is just a military drone. And so, there's a whole range of them. Some of them are used for surveillance, some of them are used for attack. And, they've even got little ones there like the Black Hornet, which is just a tiny little drone, which should be a surveillance drone. However, when you combine these things with artificial intelligence, the whole murkiness of this area becomes a little bit clearer. And there were reports that a while ago that a drone was using artificial intelligence and basically blew up an area and killed a lot of people. And this is where people get a little bit concerned, because if artificial intelligence is starting to make decisions on life and death, what's to say that there's not a mistake in an algorithm and things go very bad very quickly? And this is where it's really important for people to consider these, I suppose, ethical discussions as well when talking about drones.